Minister's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, good morning. Quite a few comings and goings on the first page of my report. I would like to mention two of them. Mamie Lay, who was a section director, has retired, I think, this time for good. We got Mamie from BCDC, where she had, I think, the longer part of her career. We're wishing her well. We also lost Dave Orey under departures, who was our lead modeler. And we lost him to Google, which I hope is not the beginning of a trend, because we're sort of in the belly of the beast right here. And so I hope they're not picking off our employees one by one. But we do wish him well. He's with their outfit, Sidewalk Labs, which I expect will be crossing paths again in the future. I mentioned at the bottom of the first page the Future Interstate Committee that I'm serving on. This is a committee of the National Academy of Sciences. They held a field hearing here. I'll be attending a couple in the Midwest later in the spring, and then our work is expected to conclude in 2018. So it's a pretty involved, complicated effort, a multi-million-dollar study that is intended to give the Congress and the administration guidance about what to do with our interstate system. At the top of page 2, I think you went through a fire drill not too long ago. For those of you who may remember, given the currency of the notion of a big infrastructure package in Washington, there are lots of folks scurrying around trying to put together lists of projects, either to demonstrate the need for infrastructure funding or to actually get them funded in the list. The National Governance Association did such a thing, and so we participated in that here in California. I think we were given 24 hours to come up with a list, which we did, and some of our projects, as you can see in attachment 1, were included. We have no idea what happens to this list, and anyone who tells you they do is not telling you the truth. And at this point, I have to say, it looks like the order of business in Washington is going to be health care first, then tax reform, then infrastructure. And infrastructure may be next year as a result of that, because those first two items are quite complicated all by themselves. It may be they only get through one. So stay tuned on infrastructure. We'll keep you posted. The chairman mentioned our visit to Washington. You've got at your places the report that we delivered. This is the 38th annual report we've delivered. Our Washington lobbyist, Tom Bulger, has done this 38 times. I think I'm well into the 20s. So it is, I agree with the chairman, a very valuable exercise, even if we come home disappointed, which in this case I think we largely did. Although those of us who got all the way to Washington, I think Commissioner Liccardo got all the way to Texas and then had to turn around and go home. So he was probably more disappointed than we were. When we got home, we saw what we were talking about in Washington, which is the so-called skinny budget. The nomenclature skinny and fat comes from the fact that a brand new president typically is well behind the 8 ball in terms of his or her first budget because they're inaugurated in January and the budget is usually produced in January and sent to Congress. And so the tradition has been the new administration puts together a skinny budget, which is really just an outline, and then comes in later with a real budget, which we expect this year will be sometime in May. So it's actually this time running a little later than normal for a first-time president, but it's still not unexpected. I suppose the contents of the skinny budget weren't unexpected either because the president had announced that he wanted to make a big $50 billion annual increase in the defense and national security budgets, and he didn't want to increase the deficit, which means if you're not going to go after Social Security and Medicare, you've got to go after the other things that are in the discretionary part of the budget, along with defense, and that's the non-defense discretionary items, and transportation was not spared. So the cognitive dissonance we have here is an administration saying they want to do a big new infrastructure push, and one of their first budgetary proposals is to eliminate future capital investment in public transit extensions in America, it's a little hard to square that circle. But that is the recommendation. There were two big news items coming out of the transportation part of the budget, and I've included, and it tells you how skinny it is, I've included the little over one-page Department of Transportation summary in Attachment 2. I think what got quite a bit of airtime is the so-called Tiger program, which is not even authorized in federal law. It's been an appropriations process for the last few years. The Bay Area early on did okay. We got a bunch of money, as I recall, for Doyle Drive. But in recent years, it's been hit or miss. And personally, I'm not sure if Tiger goes away, I'll miss it all that much. New Starts is a totally different story. And the federal New Starts program, which is easily the most important discretionary federal transportation program there is, either highway or transit, and in this case it is a transit program, that is being proposed for elimination going forward. There are several projects that have what are called full funding grant agreements, which means they have a commitment from the federal government to pay out a certain amount of money over a certain number of years. And the President's proposal in particular is that they would pay those out and then the program would essentially cease to exist. And for those of you who've been around a while, you know that the Bay Area has been a major beneficiary of this program. The BART extension to San Francisco Airport was a New Start project, as was the Tasman Light Rail extension. That was our first generation of New Start programs, projects. We have a second generation that is under construction, the Muni Metro Central Subway, and the first leg of the BART extension into Silicon Valley. Those projects, in fact, are seeking their last increments of federal New Start funding in FY18, and I think they should be safe, given the fact that the initial proposal from the administration is to pay out the existing full funding grant agreements. Where this thing really, the rubber hits the road for the Bay Area is we have a queue of 4 or 5 projects that want to get into the New Start program. The second leg of the BART extension into Silicon Valley, the second phase of the Trans-Bay Terminal, a few blocks away from here. 2 core capacity projects, the Caltrain electrification, which, as you know, does not have a full funding grant agreement. It's that close. Maybe it's that close. We don't know. But it's, in terms of sequence, it's at the finish line trying to get over. As well as BART, which is seeking to reinvest in its system and seek core capacity money. Those 4 at least. I'll mention a couple of things, if I could, just so that I give you as full of a picture as I can. What I included in Attachment 3 in your packet is the queue. These are all the projects that are either they've received their full funding grant agreement, and that's denoted in the chart in the stage of development, or they're waiting to get to that place in the queue. And I've indicated with arrows the various projects in the Bay Area, and I wanted to make a couple of points about that. One is the Trans-Bay Terminal Phase 2 is not included because they're not formally in the queue, but their clear plan and our long-range plan, Plan Bay Area, contemplates that project getting New Start money. Secondly, as the chairman indicated, the Caltrain project is very much hanging in the balance right now. I don't think we could ask for a better lobbyist than the governor of California, and he is back there doing that right now. But I don't think we're encouraged by what we heard in Washington. In addition to the particular issue that looms over Caltrain, which is its connection to the high-speed rail program, which a lot of our Republican members of Congress from California don't like, there is also the fact that if the President's budget were implemented as proposed, no project that doesn't have a full funding grant agreement would get funded, and that includes Caltrain, which would be sort of right there at the window of the teller when they draw the shade down and say the bank is closed. So I think the President's budget submission highlights the peril, frankly, that that project is in. And we're certainly going to do our dead level best to get that contract signed. But right now, it's on the wrong side of that finish line. And then finally, if you'll note in the attachment, you'll see the SMART project in San Rafael. And SMART is largely paying for its own program. It's sort of like the first brand new transit system since BART. But they were able to secure funding in FY16 for an extension from San Rafael to Larkspur. That funding package was basically 50-50 between the federal government and us through bridge tolls. And you'll see that, as indicated here, they do not have a full funding grant agreement either. They actually get something called a small starts agreement because they're, as the name implies, smaller projects, smaller increments of federal funding, but they need one anyway. And you'll have an action before you in April for us to allocate our local funds so that we could show the feds, hey, we're here and we want you to sign this one. Now, the reason to have some hope for SMART, whereas with Caltrain we may have a different kettle of fish, is that the SMART money's already been appropriated. And our hope is that they can just say, look, that's good enough. The money's already been appropriated. We don't need to cut it to save money. But still, that's a step that needs to be taken for SMART for this project to move forward with the federal money. I mentioned at the end of my section on the Trump budget submission the fact, and you all know this as local policymakers, transportation was not the only one affected. This budget submission was really sort of a broad assault on metropolitan America. And so you had very significant cuts to the Community Development Block Grant Program. You had EPA taking one of the biggest percentage cuts in the government. And I think most of you are probably aware, our partners in this building, all three of them, get EPA grants. And so we are exploring the notion of sort of a concerted regional agency response here in the Bay Area because we're all really on the chopping block. It's not just one or the other of us. And as I said, all of that money is really in one way or another trying to advance our Plan Bay Area and sustainability agenda. And I made this point to several members of Congress when we met with them. You know, the Bay Area, not the Bay Area, in California now, the federal program, the federal transportation program, is about 13% of the total. But there's a big difference between 13% and zero. And, you know, what we rely on that 13% for are these kinds of very difficult, very large, very lumpy mass transit extensions. We've been very good at securing those funds, but you can't secure funds from a program that doesn't exist. And so I think that certainly is job one around here. And we'll be talking to you about it, I expect, every month from now until the time the budget is put to bed. And so let me hasten to the conclusion. I think we could put up the map of the month right now. Which is one of the benefits of what we've been able to do with new data that we acquire from some of these new mobility companies, in this case Waze. And if we could turn the page, I don't know if I need to, there it is. The map requires a little bit of explanation. So what it shows you is congestion data, incident data that we have on the roadway network. And the blue is from our roving tow trucks, which are about as low-tech as you could get. Because once they assist somebody, they plug it into the computer and we know what happened. Waze is a bunch of people driving around, giving carpools and doing this and doing that. And as you can see in a lot of corridors, it's really our insight into what's going on there. The place that those blobs are on the map is an indication of where the most incidents are. And, you know, we've called it the nasty Nimitz for a long time, Interstate 880, and you can see why. It seems like it has a new incident every half hour almost, all day long. But you can see incidents around the region. As you know, congestion is about 50% incidents. It's not all capacity related. It's breakdowns, it's running out of gas, it's accidents, it's weather, it's all that stuff. So I present that to you for your information. I did want to highlight two upcoming events. One of them is tomorrow I'll be going down with my counterparts at the other large MPOs to testify before the Air Resources Board. They are in the process of setting new targets for our sustainable community strategies. And as you might expect, they are looking at making the targets tougher, not easier, because we have all met them so far. And I did share with the Planning Committee a few days ago some of the concerns that we have about moving those targets too far out. Because if the targets become unachievable, the good news is there's no penalty. No one goes to jail. No one pays a fine. But what we do have to do is an alternative planning strategy, which essentially unmoors, in my judgment, our long-range plan from the really incredible amount of work that all of you have done selling Plan Bay Area to local government and working with local government on OBAG and all the rest of it. That all depends on the SCS really having the force of law and really showing a firm commitment. When we get into alternative planning scenarios, we're basically just positing what would it take to come up with new emission reductions if we had all the money in the world, or if we could change land use overnight. And look, I'm probably giving away the game in how I'm describing it, but I do believe that it would be a much less disciplined and meaningful exercise if what we are doing is just coming up with some numbers to prove that we can do it, versus doing the hard work of trying to come up with a strategy that you think you can really implement. Enough said about that. I also want to mention on Friday, you are all certainly invited, but we will be having a joint meeting of the Planning Committee and the ABAG Administration Committee. This is actually an action meeting where the staff will present the contract for services and the memorandum of understanding on governance for those committees to review, and we hope forward to the two respective boards in April for approval, so that we can get the staff moved over by the beginning of the next fiscal year. And finally, I've got a little bonus for you. I hope you don't mind it and you can indulge me. It really has nothing to do with transportation, but I just saw it the other day. It does have to do with Washington. And this is a home movie that's been discovered in the Hoover archives, and it's believed to be the first color film of the White House. And it's not colorized. This is an actual home movie that was made in the late 20s, so it's almost 100 years old. So I'll just ask the control room to roll the video. I think it's the only recorded instance of Herbert Hoover smiling, too, if you see it coming up. They're out exercising with the medicine ball. So it sort of tells you where things are in Washington, that at least I found myself growing a little nostalgic for Herbert Hoover. That concludes my report.
It was interesting. It said democracy dies in darkness under the Washington Post logo at the end of that movie, but never mind. Okay, that was a very complete report, and it just represents the fact that there's a lot of things going on just now in the body politic that are impacting us directly and will continue to so do. Any questions of the Executive Director at this time? Seeing none, we thank you for that. Commissioners, under agenda item number 5, this is an opportunity for you to comment or make an announcement, however